Hi everyone, the videos this week are going to be broken up because I'm just going to focus on the tutorial for human reproductive and development because this one's fairly long and I want to have all the time. So this is a separate video from the instructions video for the week. You'll need to watch that one as well. We're going to jump right into this. Yes, this week we are talking about human reproduction and development, and yes, we're going to talk about sex. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to see the objective, which is you will use models to explain how human reproduction is controlled by anatomical and biochemical processes. So when we say models, we don't mean like supermodels. We mean like drawings and simulated computer models to explain how human reproduction. So that's going to be everything having to do with human reproduction. We're going to be talking about the production, the structures of the male and female reproductive anatomy, the production of the male and female sex cell, the fertilization of the fertilization of humans, so the female sex cell or the egg is fertilized by the male sperm, and then the development of the child as it grows all the way to fully developed, and then its birth, and even a little bit after that. So this is a huge amount of information, and I'm going to go through it as slowly but as concisely as I can, as quickly but as concisely as I can. We're going to be talking about anatomical processes. These are processes that are caused by the actual structure of the male and female reproductive anatomy, and we're going to be talking about the biochemical processes. These are the hormones and the other things that happen before, during, and after reproduction. Before we get started, a quick note: just because I don't necessarily show you these questions in the tutorials doesn't mean you're not supposed to do them. Yes, you are most definitely supposed to be doing them. This warm-up talks about two words: infertility and impotence, and you're going to need to Google those, find out what they mean, and then explain the difference, or explain whether they mean the same thing or the difference in your answer. And it is an answer, something you have to type out. Same thing here with the next one. Now you see why I don't show them to you. The first thing we're going to be talking about are the actual organs. These are the male and female parts that are involved in the production of the sperm and egg cell, the production of the hormones that regulate the reproductive process, and the actual structures themselves. The human reproduction occurs when a male sperm, and by the way, this is very similar in all mammals, is how this occurs, and if you stretch it out a little bit, is very similar in all vertebrates to some degree. It does get more and more different the further away you get from being a human, but especially in mammals, it's almost virtually identical. Okay, but the human reproduction occurs when a male sperm fertilizes a female egg. This then involves specialized organs, tissues, biochemical processes, including hormones, especially in the female reproductive process. The hormonal control over quite a bit of the female, not just the reproductive organs, but even the rest of the body, is pretty impressive. And females have a huge change on a week-by-week basis in their biochemistry based around their reproductive cycle. Okay, so here we have the male reproductive system. If you're giggling right now, you're going to need to stop, because yes, we're going to talk about it. The male reproductive system consists of external and internal organs. The external organs involve the penis and the scrotum and the testicles inside of the scrotum. This actually says testes. There's a slight difference, but we don't really need to know that. But the scrotum and the testicles inside of the scrotum are just outside of the body. The main reason for this is that the production of sperm has to be done at a temperature slightly lower than the natural body temperature of a human, which is about 98.6. So if these are outside of the body slightly, then it's happening in a slightly cooler environment. The interesting thing is that depending on the clothing you're wearing, depending on your job, it might be a job where you're constantly around high temperatures, such as welding or cooking or things like that, and that can have an effect. Okay, but the penis has a tube going through it called the urethra, and that serves two functions, and it splits right there. Function number one is to eliminate the bladder, the urine comes out, but function number two is also to deliver through this process, to deliver a fluid called semen, which contains it contains fluids that are lubricating and nutritional, plus it also contains a sperm, and that of course is ejaculated out by a muscle right there called the epididymis, I think. Yeah, it's called the epididymis, and then it is designed to be injected into a female reproductive anatomy, which I think is next. Let's go there. Maybe not. Oh no, we're going to talk more about testes. If you were to take a look at the cells that create the testes, they're also called male sex organs or gonads. They produce the sperm. They also produce the male sex hormone testosterone. Now, to be very clear, both males and females have testosterone and estrogen, but males have a higher amount of testosterone than estrogen. Females have a higher amount of estrogen than testosterone. And in fact, that relationship, that ratio between the two can change throughout your life, and that then creates a very different thing happening in our bodies. Men's testosterone level tend to go down as they get older, whereas females' testosterone levels tend to go up as they get older, and it causes some changes in both the anatomy and the way that the body works, and it also tends to cause some changes in behavior. The male reproductive system typically has two testes that are in the scrotum. Each testes is an oval structure, and within each testes lies several hundred coiled tubes called seminiferous tubules. These structures produce sperm. They're produced, basically you can see that starting right here. They start here in the middle, and they start slowly working their way out. In fact, in the middle of this seminiferous tubule, you can actually see the tails of some of the sperms are being produced here, and they work their way out, and eventually they come out here and they start working their way down through the tubules. Okay, and we're talking about a bunch when we're talking about millions on a daily basis. Men constantly produce sperm once they reach reproductive age and physical maturity, and they'll produce this sperm for years. Now the production can increase or decrease depending on all kinds of things: diet, health, even environment can change, increase or decrease the amount of sperm produced, but it is a constant production of sperm that requires a lower body temperature, and this is your average body temperature. It has to be lower than this, so warm temperatures can interfere with sperm production, which is why the sperm or the testicles are usually kept outside of the body. Moving forward. The epididymis is a long coiled tube that lies outside on the back of each testis. Yep, I had that wrong a minute ago. The epididymis is here. This epididymis captures, or I wouldn't say captures, collects the sperm, and it moves through the vas deferens up into the male body, out of the testicles, and into right behind it the prostate, or the prostate gland. And the prostate, of course, is a muscular, it's a muscle that is involved in basically it will open the urethra to, when you have to, the urethra is naturally closed, okay? When the bladder is full and it needs to be released, and both males and females have this prostate gland, but when the bladder is full and it needs to be released, then this muscle actually kind of opens up this valve and lets the urine come out. So, when you got to go pee and you're holding it, this muscle is wanting to open, and when you finally go to relieve yourself, that's what you do, is you open that muscle. It's also involved in ejaculation. There's a gland here called the bulbourethral gland that produces quite a bit of fluid that does all kinds of things. It changes the pH of the fluid the sperm's found in to prepare it to be injected into the female reproductive tract, and various other things, lubricating and nutritional fluids that go in there, and that's basically it. There are things called seminal vesicles. They open into the vas deferens, they produce more of the fluid as well. So there's a lot of fluid production here. The seminal vesicles, the bulbourethral gland, the testes themselves, the epididymis, it all goes together to create semen. Alright, moving along. Now, when the male testes, or the gonads, or those entire structures, when sperm is not produced either correctly or in enough quantity, so you're not making enough, or what you're making is somehow damaged or defective, that's called infertility. This is essentially a male partner cannot produce the proper sperm to fertilize the egg. The treatment for infertility it depends on what's causing it. It could be nutritional, it could be environmental, it could be structural. And there's all kinds of things that can have to be potentially changed in order for someone to become fertile. There's a whole business all about it, and a lot of times it just doesn't happen because between the sperm production and the testes all the way up to the process of ejaculation, something's wrong physically. So quite often you can go to a fertility clinic in which they will remove the sperm directly from the testes and do like a test tube baby, where they then inject it into, they remove the egg from the female, they put it into a type of container, they put the two together, fertilization occurs outside artificially, and then the fertilized egg is put back into the female. We've been doing this since the 70s. We've only gotten better at it, and to be honest with you, it's allowed couples that previously couldn't have children to have children, which is a wonderful thing. There are other things that can be fixed as well, and this is allowing couples to again finally have children. However, impotence is something entirely different. This is not necessarily considered infertility. This is considered to be an inability to maintain an erection, and there's a lot of things that cause that. And I do mean, oh my God, you have no idea the things that can cause this. It could be diet, something the man is eating that is causing a problem here. Medication, stress is probably the leading cause of this. There could be some damage that has been done through some type of injury. A lot of sports injuries can lead to this, and some of this can be repaired physically by having surgery. Some of this can be repaired with medication, and some of this has to be repaired psychologically, because that's the problem. This is a problem that males face, and again, nothing to be laughed at or embarrassed of. It's something to be treated. Now, other than sperm production, one of the main functions of the testes is to produce the male hormones that are responsible for the regulated production of sperm and then the delivery of the sperm. One of the main ones we've already talked about is testosterone. Testosterone is released at some point at the beginning of puberty, and it causes there to be a lot of physiological changes in the male. It is a chemical structure, in fact quite similar in structure to cholesterol, but upon beginning of production at puberty and extending pretty much for the rest of the male's life, males do go through a form of menopause in which this testosterone production is dramatically reduced, but it is much later in life. It controls the secondary sex characteristics that appear in puberty. The males become larger, they start developing larger bodies, they start developing body hair in places they didn't have it, such as in the face, the armpits, the groin. The voice is deeper, just all kinds of things that are associated with males. Okay, another hormone is GnRH, or gonadotropin release hormone. The hypothalamus, which is in the brain, as you recall, it produces GnRH. The hormone acts on the pituitary gland and regulates the release of something called FSH, which both males and females have, and LH, which both males and females have. When males release FSH and LH, it essentially starts to encourage the testes to produce sperm and then move the sperm through the tract, preparing for ejaculation. And it happens similar in females in terms of producing the egg. And this gets a little complicated, but just follow along. In the brain, the hypothalamus reduces GnRH, which then stimulates the pituitary gland to release timed release now, and this is important, especially in females when you see this process in females, but also in males. A hormone called the luteinizing hormone is released that starts the production of the sperm, and then the follicle stimulating hormone, I have that backwards, the follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the production of the sperm, and the luteinizing hormone stimulates the production of the movement of the sperm through the vas deferens and up to the pituitary gland. So these two hormones cause this, basically this factory in the testicles to start working and things to start moving, and then these two hormones are produced by the pituitary gland, which is stimulated, the release of those things, by GnRH, which only happens at puberty. So this process can seem a little complicated, but it's just very simple. The hypothalamus, which is connected to the pituitary, by the way, the hypothalamus releases GnRH. The pituitary says, oh, it's time to start puberty, and so it starts releasing these two hormones, which starts the production of sperm. Happens very similar to this in females when we get there shortly. Yep, that didn't take long. Male reproductive system is pretty easy. Female's reproductive system is much more complicated, because this, of course, is only, they have to go through the entire process similar to males of egg production, but then they also maintain the uterus, which is the structure in which a fertilized egg will grow and develop into a baby, and then the delivery. So the female reproductive system is far more complicated than the male reproductive system, and so let's take a look at it. It consists of a lot of less prominently developed organs. They're all internal, very small amount of external structures on the females, and you know, it does similar things. In fact, they are, physiologically speaking, similar to the male and the female reproductive anatomy. There's a urethra, there's a urethra, there's a production. These two valves right here, the urethra and the vagina, don't connect as they do in the males back at the prostate gland, but they're still both there. And then, of course, the egg in this case moves down a very similar structure of the fallopian tube, which would be similar to the vas deferens. Here it gets into the urethra, which there's not, or I'm sorry, the uterus, which is not, there's not a complementary structure in males, but it's kind of the same thing. There's a flow of reproductive cell up to a point where hopefully there's fertilization. And by the way, to be very clear about something, yes, the penis goes here, the ejaculated sperm ends up here, and the sperm ends up moving into here, but I want to be very clear. Egg fertilization does not occur in the vagina or the uterus. It actually occurs way up here inside of the fallopian tube, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But fertilization of the egg occurs this far up in the female anatomy, which is crazy if you think about it. So just another quick look here. The ovaries are, again, similar to the testicles or the testes in the males. The ovaries produce the egg in a surprisingly similar process. The eggs are released. They travel down the fallopian tubes. At that point, they're called oocytes. These back here, these immature eggs are called oocytes. They produce into a mature egg. The mature egg is released. It travels down the fallopian tube. If it is fertilized, it's fertilized somewhere right about here, depending on the timing. The process of moving takes a matter of days, but once if the egg is fertilized here, it then travels on down here and into the uterus, to where it will embed into the wall of the uterus and start receiving nutrition from the mother. The wall of the uterus is one of the most important things that changes during the female reproductive cycle, which is on a monthly basis, every 28 days. And the wall of this uterus will strip itself at the end of the menstrual cycle. That's what happens when all the discharge happens. But then there is, it begins to build up again, and the wall of the uterus builds up slowly over time. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but it's like a catcher's mitt. It is ready to grab that egg, and that egg will embed just anywhere in here, and that's why it's so engorged in terms of structure. Excuse me, because the egg, depending on just, you know, whatever, the egg can embed here or here or here in a couple of places, and the uterus needs to be prepared for it to be embedded anywhere. So it gets full of this nutrient tissue that the egg can attach to and start, it actually nestles down in there and goes inside of this structure. So I don't know how far ahead I got here, but The ovaries produce two female hormones called estrogen and progesterone, which is similar to testosterone and GnRH, and then that again is released in terms of timing. So timing is controlled here much more closely by the pituitary gland in females because there is a cycle. Men don't necessarily have as much of a cycle. Okay, we've already talked about this, but let's be clear. The uterus is the area behind the cervix. The uterus is the area in which the embryo will, the fertilized egg, or what we call the zygote, will embed. Then the zygote will grow into start becoming mature. We call that an embryo, and at which point from an embryo until birth is called an infant child. But the embryo will grow in here for approximately 9 months until it moves down through the cervix, out through the vagina, and is born. There will be a cord that connects from the embryo to this area that it attached in the uterus, and that's called the umbilical cord. And that umbilical is where all of the metabolism of the infant or the embryo's needs are met. The mother feeds it nutrition and fluids, and waste is removed. In a lot of cases, not all of it. It can get disgusting inside of there, but you know, and then it stays there until the baby is ready to go to term. If you've ever seen a pregnant woman, you'll understand that this becomes massive in terms of size, which again, women are so amazing. To then leave this muscular area here called the cervix will start to what we call dilate, and the baby leaves here. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. The exterior female reproductive anatomy involved the mons pubis, which is slightly more prominent in males and females, the prepuce, the clitoris, the labia major, the labia minor, the urethral orifice. This is the end of the urethra where urine comes out, and the vaginal orifice. And then of course down here is the anus. And this is the structure of the females. And notice that the urethra and the vagina are two separate orifices in females, whereas males, the similar ones are combined back right behind the pituitary gland. I'm sorry, the prostate gland. The female hormones happen the same, very similar way. The hypothalamus releases GnRH, where it then stimulates the pituitary gland to release the same two hormones, the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone. The luteinizing hormone and the FSH go to the ovaries, and the ovaries are in a constant state of production of an egg. An egg, at this point called an oocyte, starts preparing itself, and then when the follicle stimulating hormone appears, a follicle is actually wrapped around the egg. Further production of the egg until it's ready to be released by the ovary, and that's when the luteinizing hormone causes the follicle to release the egg, and the egg starts moving down the fallopian tube. The follicle, by the way, continues back and is reused again and again. This happens on a monthly basis, and the production of estrogen stimulates the hypothalamus to release these and the pituitary gland to release these. So it's kind of again a cycle. Again, females, the reproductive system can face problems just as in men. Females can have problems with egg production. They can have problems with the actual physical structure of the ovary, physical structure of the fallopian tubes, physical structure of the cervix or the uterus, and even a physical structure of the vagina that somehow causes all this to not happen the way it's supposed to happen. Again, this can be caused, same as in female and males, this can be caused by a physical problem with the reproductive organs. It can be caused by an environmental problem, maybe something the female is consuming, or something in the environment is causing the anatomy to not function properly, or the hormones to not function properly. And it can even be psychological, at what point the female is going through a tremendous amount of stress or some other type of situation in which the hormone release is not done properly, and then the entire system isn't working. Again, most of this is treatable. We've gotten very good at treating infertility in both males and females, and it can be treated through a surgical process. It can be treated through medicine, or depending on the situation, it can be treated through even psychological therapy. It's interesting to note that the female does not have a necessarily similar problem called impotency. impotency in males is a problem with creating an erection, and females don't have that problem. Okay, so the cycle starts for females. It starts here. We'll call this day 1. This is immediately after the egg does not get fertilized, and the body realizes it, and it starts to remove all of the tissue that was created for the potential pregnancy from the reproductive system, mostly the uterus. The egg and the uterus kind of start just moving themselves out through the vagina. This is what we typically call the female's period. The wall of the uterus becomes much thinner by about day 5, so 5 days later. Back at the ovary, another egg is starting to mature, and then the follicle is produced at about the same time that the walls of the uterus are thinnest. They're starting to build back up through days 14 all the way up to day 21. The egg is moving through the ovary and is finally released on about day 14. So about halfway through, because it's a 28-day cycle, about halfway through after the beginning of the period, about 14 days later is when the egg is released, and sometime between that 14th and 28th day, although the 21st day is the optimal time, is when the optimal time for reproduction, for pregnancy to occur, fertilization. This does not mean that there is a time here in which you cannot get pregnant. This used to be something that's called the rhythm method, and women would track their timing, and they would say, okay, at this time here I am not susceptible to becoming pregnant, therefore they could have unprotected sex, and we started finding out that nope, that's not right. So there is no point in the female cycle in which a sperm being present or sex wouldn't cause pregnancy. And we found that out the hard way. A lot of unwanted pregnancies were occurred because women thought there was a safe time that they could have unprotected sex. That's not the case. Notice that the lining, what is called the endometrial lining, the endometrial lining of the uterus strips down at the end of the period and then starts to build back up. Right here is when it is at its thickest, and when it hopes to see an egg embed into the wall of it. It's ready to capture the egg and nurture the egg to the point of being able to take care of it developing more. We'll talk about how the egg develops soon, and if that doesn't happen, then this is all shed again, and this process continues again. It takes once every 28 days. If there is an egg embedded into this wall, then this whole process stops, because now you are technically pregnant. This whole process stops, and we start a whole new process. But this is the menstrual cycle, assuming there is no fertilization of the egg. The menstrual cycle can be broken down into 4 phases, and these are also broken down by days. So days 1 through 5 are what we call the flow phase. This is the first day of the menstrual cycle, and it's when the menstrual flow begins. This is when the uterus sheds all the blood, the tissue, the epithelial cells, the whole lining of the uterus is called the endometrium, or the endometrial lining, is kind of shed and it starts to come out. Okay, it's important because the lining is important because it's a place for the embryo to go if there's a fertilized egg present, and then it starts to immediately get oxygen and nutrients from the bloodstream. But if there is no fertilized egg, then then all of it is stripped off and is removed, and it starts the process all over again. The second time, from days 6 through 11, is called the follicular phase. This is when the follicle is maturing in the ovary. Also, the release of the FSH and LH hormones by the pituitary gland, and also the lining of the menstrual or of the uterus starts to build back up. The ovulation phase is when the luteinizing hormone finally convinces the follicle to rupture and release the egg, and the egg starts to travel down the fallopian tube. Some things happen in the cervix, and there's some mucus in there that would help any present sperm to move through the cervix and through the uterus more quickly. This is optimal prime time for fertilization. Also, keeping in mind the egg is in the fallopian tube here, and if it is going to be fertilized, this is where it's going to happen. And then finally, there's what we call the luteal phase. It begins when the egg is released, the follicle then goes back to something called a corpus luteum, and it starts releasing progesterone and estrogen, and then the egg is moving. If it's fertilized, it moves down the fallopian tube and gets embedded in the wall of the uterus, at which point all of this stops and you start nourishing the fertilized egg to become an embryo. If there is no fertilized egg, then we go all the way to day 28, and the menstrual cycle, the flow cycle starts, and the egg, or the entire process, is reset. Take a look at these, because this is somewhat complicated, but you know, it's not too bad if you just kind of follow along what's happening. The main thing is to keep an eye on what's happening in the ovaries and in the uterus, because things happen at the same time in both places. Now, to be clear, millions of sperm are released during ejaculation, 300 million, roughly, to be exact. Now, this number can change tremendously depending on the age of the male, the health of the male, the diet of the male, the environment, how promiscuous they are. I mean, there's just so many things that go to affect the production of the sperm, but about 300 million. That's 300 million sperm are released, okay? Only one of those is going to fertilize the egg, and some things I want to be clear about. There is never a time in which 2 sperm fertilize an egg and that egg lives. 1 egg, 1 sperm. That's not how you get twins. That's not, you know, all the other things you may have heard. 1 egg and 1 sperm. Anything other than that, and then the resulting structure is going to die. So the sperm, a small amount of sperm reach the egg. The egg has, you know, they're all on the outside, and they're all trying to convince the egg to let them in. The egg finally causes a change in the wall, very small spot in which 1 sperm gets in. It only puts a very small part of itself inside of the egg. The tail breaks off, and basically the genetic information, which is found here, is then incorporated into the egg, combines with the genetic information from the mother. So the mom and the dad's egg or genetic information are together for the first time, and if there are no compatibility issues, which occasionally there are, then the egg will start a normal process. It becomes actually a cell, and the cell starts to grow and divide through a process called mitosis that we're going to be talking about soon, and that's how you start to become a human. When this becomes, in the result, every single cell that ever becomes this human will have started right here. Every cell in your body, every cell that you've ever made, that you have now, or ever will have, started right here with 1 fertilized egg. And the result is that this egg will grow and divide, and at some point the resulting divisions will create things like skin and muscle and hair and bones and brain cells and nerve cells and top of your head cells all the way down to the bottom of your feet cells. They all come from this 1 single fertilized egg, which is pretty incredible if you think about it. Again, a very quick reminder that the fertilization occurs in the fallopian tube. 99.9% of the time, the fertilized egg then continues moving down the fallopian tube and into the uterus, at which point it embeds into the wall of the uterus, and then it starts receiving nutrition. That's one of the reasons that the egg is so large and the sperm is so small, because the sperm doesn't have to last very long, just a couple of days, whereas the egg has to last for a long time, so it has to carry with it all of its nutrition that needs to keep it alive until it can get down here and embed it into the wall of the uterus. This is the normal process. It starts way up here at the ovary and moves its way down the fallopian tube into the uterus. Occasionally, the process can lead to multiple births, such as twins. There's 2 ways that can happen. This egg right here, this fertilized egg, which is now basically a cell, can grow and divide into 2 new cells, and then those cells separate, and then 1 embeds here and 1 embeds here, and this becomes twins. These are how you get identical twins. If you're an identical twin, at one point you and your brother or sister were a single cell that split apart, and 1 embedded in one part of the uterus and 1 embedded in the other. This creates a situation in which you now have 2 children growing in the uterus, and it happens all the time. And it's you know, twins are awesome, right? Now, interestingly enough, that's for identical twins. Fraternal twins happens when 2 eggs are released, either by the same ovary or usually by opposite ovaries. Sometimes that happens, and so now I've got a situation in which 1 egg is coming from here, 1 egg is coming from here. They both get fertilized, they both embed, but to be clear, they are not genetically identical because they were not at any point the same cell like identical twins are. I'm going to go you one further real fast, and because I know I'm making this take long, but sometimes identical twins can they embed so close to each other that they start out to be identical twins, but their masses grew together and they grew just back to become a normal human. You may have at one point been a twin, but you just grew back together. That happens quite often as well. One other thing I want to talk to you about is, sadly, occasionally the egg will embed in the fallopian tube, not quite out into the uterus. It'll get right in here somewhere and embed. And this is called an ectopic pregnancy. And unfortunately, it can't survive. There's not enough room here. The mass, the zygote won't grow properly, and it can actually cause a severe problem. One of the few solutions is to go in and remove the entire one of the side of the reproductive system here. It's okay because women can have the other side, but the pregnancy has to be terminated. Dang it. And that's it. And I think I've screwed this whole thing up. I don't think I recorded what I meant to record. So it seems a shame to kind of reduce this down to one slide because so much is happening right here. But when the egg is fertilized, it is a single cell. It almost immediately starts to grow and divide into 2 cells, which those grow and divide into 4, then 8, then 16, then 32, and continuing in growth. Sometime between 16 and 32, and then after that is 64, etc. The growth does tend to change, but sometime between those two, it starts to create a spherical hollow ball called a blastocyst. And also sometime right through here is when the cell embeds into the wall of the uterus, and then it starts to gather nutrition from the mother, and the mother helps to take over the metabolism of the developing embryo. At this point is called a zygote, which then changes into an embryo right about here, a fetus then embryo kind of thing. You know, it's all terminology. But this is it at 4 weeks, and then at 10 weeks, and 16, and even at 20 weeks. And you know, the process goes on to 40 weeks, and halfway through, I mean, heck, 10 weeks in, it looks a lot like a baby. That's 10 weeks after fertilization. Okay, that's 2.5 months after fertilization. This thing is already developing a neural system, a heartbeat, and it's starting to show. It's beyond being a tissue. You know, it is actually a developed, viable, soon-to-be living child. Of course, there's a video that explains a lot of this. I encourage you to watch it. It's 4 minutes long, but I'm already going very long on this video. And the last thing we're going to talk about is what happens to the mom during this 40 weeks. So the mom goes through an incredible amount of hormonal and biochemical change. It's almost like the female's body stops and says, whoa, okay, all we're doing from here until this baby's born is take care of this baby. And it causes an incredible amount of changes physiologically in the female. Now, women often claim to feel awesome during pregnancy, even though it's got to be so disruptive. But you know, it is a wonderful thing, and I think that a healthy female carrying a healthy fetus finds it to be a very rewarding and uplifting experience. So even though it sounds bad, you know, it is actually most women who want to be pregnant are quite thrilled to be pregnant. One of the things that's happening is hormones are being produced all the way up until the last, like, just hours before the birth. Hours before the birth, the pituitary gland, which regulates all the hormones, it secretes a couple of hormones one's called oxytocin, which causes the uterus muscles to start to contract and to put pressure on the mass, the amniotic sac. You'll see it in a second, and the baby and everything. And also the ovaries produce, which is not the pituitary gland, but basically the pituitary gland tells the ovaries to produce something called relaxin, which causes the ligaments and the cartilage of the uterus, of the cervix, to starting to expand, they relax, they expand in what we call dilation. Now here we are, the baby is head first, is called crowning at the opening of the cervix. This is a normal thing. The baby is supposed to come out face first. It's usually face down. It can come out face up, that does happen, but what we don't want is what we call a breech birth, in which the baby has not turned, and that's a very dangerous thing. Breech babies have been born, but born alive, but it's far more to the point where the doctor will encourage it through a kind of a manipulation of they can actually push on the belly and cause the baby to turn, and then when the baby turns, then it comes out. Now what we have here is the cervix. This is starting to dilate. You'll see it right through here. Throughout the pregnancy, the cervix was sealed with an extra kind of a substance. It's called the what's it called? The mucus plug, which is just disgusting if you think about it, but that breaks loose and comes out and allows all of the amniotic fluid to come out. This is called the water breaking, and at that point the baby has to be almost immediately behind it. Within just a few hours, the cervix begins to dilate because that relaxin has been released. The oxytocin is causing the wall of the uterus to contract and push, and the baby starts coming out. And the baby comes out through the cervix and the vagina. And notice something, that when it's out, also comes out with it the umbilical cord, and then a whole layer of stuff called the placenta, and the placenta has to come out as well. So after the baby comes out, the mother also has to continue pushing out to get the placenta out as well. And there are lots of complications that can be done there, or they can be caused by the placenta not coming out properly. And that's it. It was quick, but I did cover the bulk of it. Please go back and make sure that you are filling out your notes, and as you go through the tutorial again, and hopefully you will have a pretty good understanding of human reproduction, and yeah, get to work.